Welcome to Live Law Academy, the academic initiative of Live Law, where our endeavor is to simplify complex legal issues and also to foster discussion on nuanced topics of contemporary relevance. Today we have with us Senior Advocate Nandita Rao. Ma'am is an expert in family and criminal law matters. Welcome to Live Law Academy, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ma'am, today our discussion is going to be focused on one of the enigmas of the Indian criminal justice system, a topic which is central to the working of the criminal justice system, and that's the concept of bail. While we do have some very pointed questions on the working of bail, ma'am, we would want you to simplify the concept of bail for our audience. Many of our audience are non-lawyers. So, ma'am, let's start with the concept. Can you give a sketch of what this concept of bail is? How does it operate?
Sure. So basically, I think everybody knows universally that bail is the rule and jail is the exception, which means that you are presumed to be innocent until proved guilty in a criminal justice system. So when you're innocent until you're proved guilty, as once an FIR is registered against you, which means someone makes a complaint against you, which is a criminal offense, either under the Indian Penal Code or under some special statute or under Animal Welfare Act, any offense is accused against you, you immediately, the police gets a right to arrest in certain cases.
Okay.
So you as a citizen have a right to bail. So now these rights are of various kinds. Before you are arrested, you have a right to anticipatory bail, that if you anticipate you're going to be arrested, you can go to the court and say, look, I'm ready to join investigation. If a case has been registered against you in some other city or town than where you live, you have a right to transit bail. You can go to the High Court and say that, look, I apprehend I'll be arrested, so till I reach there, and I can apply to the appropriate court, protect me in transit.
Okay.
Then you have a right to regular bail, which is that after you get arrested, you have a right to approach the court saying, I have been arrested, but I am entitled to bail, give me bail. So then you have a right to default bail. Okay. Suppose you're arrested and the investigation is not completed within 60 days or 90 days, whatever is the prescribed period for the offense. Then you have a right, that is an absolute right.
Okay.
Suppose you are in jail and the charge sheet is not filed within the period given by the law for filing of the charge sheet. Then the law says you have to be set free. Okay. If the charge sheet is filed, then you have to take regular bail, which is that you have to satisfy the court that all the evidence which is given against you, still you have a good chance of being acquitted. So keeping you in jail will be an injustice. So the entire bail jurisprudence emerges from the principle that you're presumed innocent until you're proved guilty. So if you're presumed to be innocent, you have a right against your liberty being taken.
Okay. Ma'am, you've just discussed with us various types of bail and at various stages when they can be made available. I have a follow-up question on that. First, when you talk about different stages, which is the authority which grants the bail? Is the authority at the stage when the investigation has just begun different from the authority when the investigation could not have been completed within a particular period of time? So my question is, let's say the prescribed period of time is 90 days. Is it the duty of the police then to release you on bail, or he will still have to go to the court?
Yes, you have to go to court. See, police can only release you on bail, which is known as police bail in bailable offences. Okay. Because there, the law gives you a right to bail. You only have to submit the bail bond and surety bond, which means that if the police needs you for investigation, you will turn up, and if you don't turn up, they can contact your surety. So there the bail is given by the statute itself, bailable offence. In a non-bailable offense, the police has no right to give you bail. They have a right not to arrest you.
Okay.
So in offences which are less than 7 years, the statute actually provides the CRPC 4141A, and in the BNSS you can see the comparative chart. It will give you, I think it's 35 BNSS. So the statute says that unless the police officer needs to detain, needs custodial interrogation, he has a choice not to arrest you. But once he arrests you, he can't give you bail.
Okay.
Then only the court can release you.
Okay.
And if you are a little nervous that he may arrest me, then you yourself go and get anticipatory bail.
Fair. One more question on this. So you said that there are bailable offences where you have a right to bail. Whereas when we started off, you said you have a right to apply for bail.
Yeah.
Can you point out the distinction between right to bail, which we understood in the context of bailable offences, and right to apply for bail? How does this right to apply for bail work in practice?
So, offences which are not bailable, they give the investigating authority a right to detain you. Now, this right is for multiple reasons. One, they need to investigate. So, for example, there's an allegation of murder. They may need to take the accused person to the spot where the murder took place, and or they may have to confront him with other co-accused persons, or they may have to elicit some information, or you may be a runaway risk. So in serious offences, which are more than 3 years, to the best of my recollection, the police does have a right to arrest. So the Criminal Procedure Code gives you a list of the offences which are non-bailable.
Okay.
So non-bailable does not mean you can't apply to the court for bail.
Okay.
They just mean that police has the right to arrest.
Okay.
So you can actually define it as offences in which police does not have a right to arrest, offences in which police has a right to arrest without a warrant from the court.
Okay. So when we are talking about these non-bailable offences, where you say you can apply to the court to get a bail, do you think there is some negative category in which bail is absolutely prohibited in our country? No. And I ask this in the context of money laundering, public safety offences. Is this my confusion, or is there no negative list?
So, I mean, there's no negative list. Every person accused of an offence has a right to apply to the court for bail. The considerations vary. Like in CRPC, there were certain stringent conditions which had to be met for getting bail for offences which carried a death penalty or life sentence, like rape or murder, which was that public prosecutor had to be heard and there had to be reasonable grounds that the offence will not be proved against you. So those conditions have been taken and imported into NDPS, Prevention of Corruption, UAPA, even for offences which carry a lesser punishment. Okay. So even if the maximum offence is 7 years, you can't get bail. I mean, you can't get the benefit of Arnesh Kumar, so to speak, because of these two conditions. But oddly enough, preventive detention, there is no right to bail.
Okay.
So, crazily enough, when you're accused of an offence, you can go to the court and you can prove that, look, I mean, I'm not a risk to anybody. I will not run away. I will attend court and I have a good case of acquittal. But preventive detention laws, because you are being detained on the fear that you may commit an offence. So the NDPS Act also has this provision, and then there are some preventive detention laws. So you can actually put a person away for 1 year who's not done anything. Of course, there are checks and balances, there are, tribunals which have to vet these orders that the government can pass. So, but yes, there is a category which is preventive detention. So that guy just has to sit in jail. I guess he can challenge it in a writ petition.
The preventive detention orders?
Yes, the order. So he can't get bail because he's not being tried for anything. He's not been accused of doing anything. He's just a threat. There is a likelihood if he's in society that he'll do this.
But people who are detained under preventive detention laws, they have rights under the Constitution.
Yes, yes. So they come in a writ petition.
They come in
This preventive detention order is violative of Article 21 because it's not followed the due process, or it's violative of Article 14. It's laughable. Nothing that I have done falls in the criteria. So they have to go in a writ petition. They don't have a right to bail. They have to challenge the order itself. Here, you don't have to seek quashing of the FIR. You can say FIR is there, charge sheet is there, but I have a right to bail because all the evidence still creates a probability that I will be acquitted.
Okay.
You know, so bail is different in that sense.
Okay. So when you mention that, there is a probability that I will be acquitted, is that the only criteria for grant of bail, or are there other factors that the court considers comprehensively to do an analysis whether a person should be released on bail or should not be released on bail?
So see, generally for offences which are less than 7 years, now the Honourable Supreme Court has come up with the judgment of Arnesh Kumar, which we earlier discussed. The statute provided. Criminal Procedure Code provided section 41 and 41A, which suggested to the IO that don't just arrest. If you can investigate with the guy living in his own house, that's fine. But the Supreme Court has now laid it down as a law that you first have to give him notice. If he doesn't turn up, only then you arrest. Amount of punishment prescribed for the offence is a very important and vital factor. So if it's an offence of less than 7 years, the Supreme Court has frowned upon arrest. And in such offences, getting anticipatory bail becomes easier. Because the punishment is left, the offence is considered less serious by the legislature. Then the other conditions are that you are not a runaway risk. You have deep roots in society, which means you have a house, you have a job, you have a family. Then antecedents, you have not committed any other offences, or if you have, you've been acquitted, you're on bail in those cases. Then you're not a threat to the victim. Either the offence is of such a nature that there is no victim is dead, or well, if victim is dead, then the offence is serious. So, so seriousness of the offence, likelihood of your threatening the victim, likelihood of your running away, and your willingness to join the investigation, these are the basic criteria for bail. And what the law says, which is set up by Supreme Court, Justice Krishna Iyer coined this phrase, that bail is the rule. Why? Because as we discussed, you're presumed to be innocent. You're just under investigation. So if I'm presumed to be innocent and I have met all these criteria that I won't run away, I'll cooperate with the case, I'll do this, then obviously bail has to be the rule. And jail has to be the exception. Now, once I get convicted, when you file an appeal in the High Court or the Sessions Court, then the rule changes. Then you have to show that you have a good case in appeal because you are a convict.
Okay.
So there's no presumption of innocence. You're understanding?
Yeah.
So for interim bail, that is a different category. That comes when you've been convicted and your case is pending in the higher court.
Okay. So while you mentioned, ma'am, that bail is the rule and jail is the exception, I have two questions on that. One, why do you think that trial courts are so reluctant to grant bail? And this is not just my observation, it has fallen off from many benches of the Supreme Court itself, that trial judges do not grant bail. And the second question that I have is, in limited matters, if I'm not wrong, maybe PMLA matters, some benches of the Supreme Court have remarked, ironically though, that bail is an exception and jail is the rule. Any thoughts about these two questions?
So on the first thing, I think there are a couple of reasons why trial courts are reluctant to grant bail in serious offences. One, of course, in serious offences, unless the allegations on the face of it are, like say you're accused of sedition and all you've done is read a published author or shared an extract of a known film, Now, there the offense may be serious, but the allegations just don't make out the offense on the face of it. So, in such cases, the trial court should have the courage to give bail. You know, somebody is a comedian. So, the offense alleged may be serious, but actually, when you read the content, but the trial court does not give bail for two reasons. One, I think there is an inadequacy of training.
Okay.
So the general impression in the trial court is that we have to be strict. And the second thing is fear of being labeled as corrupt.
Okay.
So in economic offences, even if it's 420, that comes under Arnesh Kumar. But if the cheated amount is big, then the trial court is worried about its reputation. So I think here the Supreme Court, of course, Supreme Court's repeated assertions verbally in speeches and in judgments should come as an encouragement to trial courts. And let me tell you, some trial courts are showing the courage.
Okay.
I mean, on the top of my head, I can't name the instances, but some trial courts have passed excellent orders in very big cases, granting bail, refusing remand. So I think it's just a question of confidence building. That they will not have to face any kind of repercussion.
Okay.
Either presumptions being drawn against them. See, I as a trial court give a bail. The High Court may disagree with me and say, no, this is not a case of bail. But if they pass remarks, it appears the trial court judges, so that harms my reputation and my career. So that creates a fear. You feel, oh, let's go with the state. Nobody can cast aspersions on me. You get my point, but that's not your job. So I do think adequate training, confidence building, and it has to be there has to be a connection between all the courts.
Okay.
The trial court judges have to feel the confidence that this is what the High Court feels and this is what the Supreme Court feels. And this is what the law says, and it's okay if we act in accordance with the law. So I think that training is required at all levels. If two benches of the Supreme Court are thinking differently, then obviously a trial court judge is getting a mixed signal. So he says, let me err on the side of caution.
Okay.
Let me just reject the bail. Nobody can point a finger on my integrity. They can say I'm dumb. They can say I'm pro-state, but they cannot say I'm corrupt. So that has to be broken.
Okay.
And training.
Okay.
All the judgments, everything has to be given. So I think bail jurisprudence, there has to be a lot of training. And there has to be judicial discipline. It can't be that one bench is known as a liberal bench, another bench is known as a conservative bench, because we are a precedent bound country. So, I mean, I may have my personal views that, somebody talking about communism is a bad person. But end of the day, unless the guy is provoking violence, he's just reading Mao or Marx, that's not a crime. So, I as a judge must have that discipline that I have to grant bail.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So, I think some kind of training from the Supreme Court, not by lawyers.
Okay.
Supreme Court judges themselves must give this confidence to the trial court and the High Court. I know they are very overburdened, but if they themselves conduct a training, then it carries a lot of weight. If a Supreme Court judge has said this, like their judgments carry weight, then I think that judges will become more, and where bail should not be given. We also have those instances.
Okay.
Where sometimes, the offense is very heinous, very serious, but the accused is very powerful. Politically or economically, and the bail is given.
Okay.
So there also that training is there. That if the offense is serious, there the threshold is higher. You have to see. I mean, he's seen on CCTV camera. The witnesses are there. It's a case of death. So there, yes, you have to keep him in jail. You can't in 6 months, if the evidence is so substantial, he's powerful, so there's a. So I do think that uniformity, training, I don't know if I should say this, but actually criminal jurisprudence, I mean, high courts are there for protecting the constitution and the right to bail after our constitution has come. First, it was just a statutory right. Now, with Article 21, it's become in a way, a constitutional right that by the procedure of law, yes, your liberty can be taken, but you have a right to liberty.
Okay.
As a colonized country, as a slave, you didn't have any right. So I do think that there has to be uniformity among judges of a court and from the top court to the lower court.
I have a follow-up question on this. So you mentioned Article 21.
Yes.
That, the difference between being an independent nation and a colony. Does Article 21 give you a separate right to bail? Maybe for violation of the procedure, maybe the delay, maybe the medical condition of the accused. Does that give you or entitle you separately, apart from the statute, to approach a constitutional court and seek release?
Article 21 is not a immunity from criminal law.
Okay.
It doesn't say you have an absolute right to liberty. What it says is that a citizen or even a visitor to the country has a right to life and liberty, which can only be taken away by the procedure established by law. So, for example, in a bailable offense, the police can't arrest you.
Okay.
If they do, it's not according to procedure established by law. So now a spate of judgments have come from Supreme Court in Satinder Antil, in Arnesh Kumar, in Manish Sisodia, in Prabir Purkayast, where the court has said that if the arrest is not in accordance with the procedure established by law. So in Antil they say if you are obliged to give a 41A notice before arresting, and you have not done that, then there is a right to bail.
Okay.
So that right comes from Article 21.
Okay.
Not just the presumption of innocence.
Okay.
You're understanding the difference.
Yeah.
So there is a mandate for greater liberalism and stricter application of criminal law. Then in Probir Purkayast, that was a PMLA offense. So the court said that the grounds of arrest have not been given in writing. So the arrest itself becomes illegal.
Okay.
You understand my point?
Yeah.
They didn't give him bail. They said the arrest is illegal. They quashed the arrest itself. So the effect is liberty.
Okay.
You're understanding my point?
Yeah.
So liberty lifts you to a higher standard than presumption of innocence.
Okay.
It's your basic right as a citizen. So the state can deprive your right, but only by the procedure established by law. Then thirdly, speedy trial. So if the state can't promise that they'll complete your trial in a given period of time, the statute says 60 days from the first witness. Let's say 6 months, let's say 1 year. But for 5 years, if you're languishing in jail and the trial is continuing and there's still 40 witnesses to go, actually courts are acquitting.
Okay.
Forget bail.
Okay.
So this speedy trial right is an Article 21 right. This is not in CRPC. This is not in BNSS.
So the accused can ask for bail, saying that his right to speedy trial is being violated.
That I've been in jail for 2 years. Offense is 7 years. No, there's no likelihood that the case is going to finish in the near future. So that is the right which comes from Article 21, not from presumption of innocence.
Okay. Let's suppose a person is released on bail. What does it mean for that person that, trial is still pending?
Yes.
Are there any limitations on what he can do, what he cannot do? Can you elaborate on that?
So see, basically as per the statute, he has to come to the court on whichever date he's called, and he has to go to the police investigation on whatever date he's called. but the court can put other conditions also. So, for example, the court may say that, look, you will not go to the area where the victim resides,
Okay.
just to, strengthen the belief that, yes, he will not harm the victim. But to give some confidence to the victim, they can say that, look, you will not come within this much area, or they may say you will not leave this city till the trial is on, so that he doesn't disappear. In economic offenses, sometimes they say where the cheated amount is huge and it's a multi-victim scam, that you have to deposit so much money, or you have to, a receiver is appointed to, seal the property, sell it and return the money. So these type of conditions are sometimes put by the court. So then they have to comply with those conditions.
Two questions on this. One, some of the conditions that you just mentioned seemed a little onerous.
Yeah.
And if I'm not wrong, some courts have also asked, share your Google Pin location, live
Yes.
location. One, whether all the conditions that a court put forward, are they legal? If they're not, can they be challenged? And if yes, where the challenge can be made? That's the first question on the bail conditions. The second question that I have is, follows from the condition that you just mentioned about pre-deposits, especially in the context of cheating offenses. Don't you think it makes it easier for people with money to then obtain bail?
No, see, yes, the Supreme Court has frowned upon these conditions and said that, look, when you're granting bail in an economic offense, you can't say deposit this money. You're not a civil court. You are not interested in recovery.
Okay.
Whether the victim gets his money or not. Basically, in a criminal justice system, the victim is kind of like a witness. Only at the end of the case, he can get compensation. So, but I personally feel that given that trials are so delayed, the system is so overloaded, and we have seen economic offenders do have the means to run away and disappear. I do feel that putting some kind of economic penalty on them, or the fear that, look, if I run away, if I breach my bail conditions, I'll lose this money. I think given the circumstances, it's fair. But yes, these type of conditions that you give your electronic location and you, I think these are not conscionable, or that you can't speak. Or like, in the case of the Delhi Chief Minister, at the time of granting him bail, it was said that you can't go to the Chief Minister's office. So, basically you are making the guy unemployed. So, suppose, how is the person supposed to, do their job? So the criminal court cannot give bail on a condition that violates your dignity.
Okay.
That you can't go to work, you can't do your work, you can't earn your livelihood, because that's not the procedure established by law. So I think these kind of conditions are more kind of pragmatism, that the court does.
What about gag orders that
Ah,
have come via bail conditions? What do you think?
I personally feel that these gag orders are not as per the procedure established by law. You can't tell a guy, don't speak, your bail will be cancelled. If what he's uttering is an offense, another case will be registered against him. And in that case, don't give him bail, saying that there's a precedent, you are habitual.
Yeah.
Like there's some hate mongers. So they keep on spouting hate, but somehow they never seem to be catching the eye of the law enforcement. But comedians and, activists and academics are always somehow found foul of law.
Yeah.
But they are never, the trial never sees the light of day.
Yeah.
So I don't think that these gag orders are correct and they should not be passed. People have to be free to do their work. They have to be free to speak. And if in terms of the law established by the law of the land, they are entitled to bail, they must have their liberty.
Another question, which follows from the past two questions that we discussed. Despite whatever you've tried to clarify, there's still an impression that the power, both in terms of money as well as in terms of political connections, they're able to manage bail from the system. And I ask this not only in the context of the adjudication that happens, but in the way the adjudication happens. So, for instance, in the context of their out of turn hearings, their matters getting listed in the court, and also the time that they get in that particular hearing. Is it some aberration observed only by a few, or do you think that there is something deeper in the system that gives this impression?
See, I think this impression is there because only the cases of the rich and the famous are publicized.
Okay.
So people feel that only these cases are being heard. I mean, some Ramlal's theft case where he got bail, nobody is interested in because nobody knows Ramlal. So to that extent, I think there is the information being circulated is disproportionate.
Okay.
So I myself have served on Legal Services Authority of the Delhi High Court for 10 years. And I can say from personal experience that the bail matters, the appeals that we used to argue, we were given adequate time.
Okay.
And our matters were taken up on their turn. It's not that they were neglected or ignored. Having said that, we are in an adversarial system. So the stature of the lawyer, I mean, that's why they are senior advocates and that is why people flock to them. Why is it that one lawyer is paid 35,000 for the whole case and another lawyer is paid 15 lakhs for one appearance?
Yeah.
It is one, knowledge of law, and secondly, the respect that person has earned in the system. So yes, that the lawyer's sort of stature does give a little bit of an edge to people who can afford that person. An ordinary lawyer, a young lawyer may not think of the best arguments. Whereas a more experienced and more expensive lawyer may actually come up with 5 arguments which are more complex, which are based on a better understanding of law. And secondly, of course, the accommodation that he would get in an adversarial system by the court. So yes, there is a benefit. But on the other hand, sometimes rich and famous people suffer because of media scrutiny.
Okay.
Because the media is sometimes, like a lynch mob. It's more of a moral court you're in. It's not a legal court. You understand, and that puts a lot of pressure on the judge. Legally, you may be entitled to bail, but oh my God, next day every newspaper will say, oh my God, this fellow got bail. You know what I mean? But his offense actually may just have a punishment of 7 years. So sometimes the rich and the famous actually suffer a media trial.
Okay.
So there are all sides to the story, but what I can say is that if the court really wants to make it a level playing field, then bail matters should be taken in the top 10 matters by every court. Every criminal court, be it the trial court, be it the high court, be it, and some courts in the Delhi High Court are doing that.
Okay.
But I think universally, bail matters should be taken in the top 10 matters or the top 100 or 50 or whatever. And I mean, end of the day, bail is not rocket science.
Yeah.
And the judges are very experienced. They can dispose them off, Secondly, they can limit the time that each lawyer gets to argue. That the court has the power. If some lawyers are carrying on in a very long-winded manner, that would be a great leveler. And thirdly, though, I must tell you the selection process to Legal Services Authority is very rigorous.
Okay.
And I can say not only when I was a legal services lawyer, but a lot of the lawyers that I see, I was also a criminal side lawyer for the state. So I've opposed legal aid lawyers also. Okay. So I must say that at least 70% of them work very hard.
Okay.
So maybe we can give better training, and probably prioritize legal aid matters. So that will give poor people a, leveler. But
that's a wonderful suggestion.
They are heard. We are, at least when I was in legal services, we were given in appeals, sometimes I've argued 2.5, 3 hours. as it should of a girl, hardly, 15 years into practice. But we were heard.
Okay.
And the moment the judge knew you are from legal services, he would give you more sort of leeway.
Okay. So, in your practice of decades now, have you observed any aberrations of the bail system in our country? I mean, despite the things that you've tried to say, that the courts have tried to overcome the difficulties that the marginalized face, but are there some aberrations? Because
see, now, I mean, I can't say anything about this conclusively, but see, if somebody is ideologically or financially corrupt and is occupying a constitutional position, then you can't do anything about that. You know what I mean? If somebody is sitting with a agenda which is not as per the rule of law, then yes, aberrations come. And there are whispers in corridors. But I do think that the Supreme Court Collegium is doing its very best to, be very transparent and to, address these suspicions, these grievances which are there in the public.
okay.
Because see, if people lose faith in the judicial system, then, it will become very difficult to have governance.
Yeah.
It is only because people, the average Joe or the average Jolina, is law abiding. The normal person goes out of his house wanting to follow the law.
Yeah.
But that is because they have faith in the judicial system. The day you don't have faith in the judicial system, then your heart gets filled with a fire. You think you are the judicial system. Then you start, meting out justice. You feel, yes, but now you feel, oh, there is a court. If someone is doing something wrong, the court is going to fix them. So I think that a vast majority of the judges work very long hours. And they are sensitive to the faith that the public has put in them. You see, in our country, people will mock politicians. They'll mock lawyers even. But doctors and the judiciary are two holy cows to some extent. So I think these people are conscious of that.
Okay. But just speaking of the aberrations, two questions on two different very facets. Yes. One of the aberrations that people have observed and academicians have highlighted is how bail system operates differently in the context of gender. It's very difficult for a woman to get a bail as compared to a man. Is that something that you've observed? And second question, they have seen that when, it's not possible for you to get a bail on the clauses that you mentioned before, they apply for something called as a medical bail. In fact, some few years ago, there was a movie called Ek Banda Hi Kafi Hai, which highlighted the loophole of obtaining a medical bail. And ironically, today as we speak, the accused, the convict in that case, is now actually out on a medical bail, though he could not be granted in 2013 or 14 when the matter was argued before the Supreme Court. But 10 years down the line, the person has managed to get medical bail. So,
so there are two questions here. One, as far as women are concerned, the Criminal Procedure Code itself says that if a woman under trial, once you're convicted, you have to go to jail. But under trial, you should avoid arrest. Because you see the family is anchored in the woman. There are children, there are old people, and generally women are homebound. They can't run away. So, and even now, so mobility for women is very less. Even a moneyed woman, it's difficult to disappear. Whereas for a man, it's easier. So, the criminal law itself says women should not be detained, and generally they are to be favored in grant of bail. Like one of the arguments we make is she's a woman, he's old. So, this compassion is there. Now, as far as people misusing and abusing medical bail, I think that is very unforgivable, both by lawyers and by accused persons, because medical bail is a compassionate bail. So in very serious offences also, where your regular bail has been rejected, But if you're sick, why this is done? Like I forget the name of the case, but the Biscuit King, he was in jail and he was very sick, and they wouldn't leave him out, so he died in Tihar jail for want of appropriate medical attention.
Mr. Pillai.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, I may be in jail for an offense which has a 7-year punishment. Now, my regular bail may be rejected because there's watertight evidence against me and there's a threat to witnesses, blah, blah. But suppose I fall very sick, I have a heart condition. Now, I have to be given medical bail because you can't kill me.
Yeah.
You can't give me a death sentence. So that compassion is there in the system. But lawyers recommending to their person, litigants getting false medical things just because you're rich and you can afford it, I think this is unconscionable. And the result is judges become very conservative in medical bail. If there's a genuinely sick guy, they then start doubting, they start verifying. On the other hand, prosecutors also can't be perverse. End of the day, if a doctor is saying he's sick and he needs hospitalization, neither a lawyer nor a judge can get into that. But if the doctor is lying, then that's on the doctor's conscience. Because I as a lawyer I can just say that, look, this is a gynecologist who's giving an opinion on neurosurgery. So there's something suspicious.
So in these cases, if a judge doubts a medical report, can he ask for a second opinion?
Yes, they get it verified by a government hospital.
So that's a check and balance.
Yes.
Okay.
But see, that delays.
Yeah.
So these malpractices shouldn't be indulged in. And who gives these ideas?
Yeah.
So we also as litigants and as legal professionals, while judges need to be liberal, I feel medical bail, you have to be liberal.
Okay.
Better to make a mistake and be fooled than to take the risk that a guy dies in jail because he's not getting proper. This is my personal view. But on the other hand, I do feel as lawyers, we should have that thing. That, if the client goes, the client goes. But I am not going to suggest to a well person that you apply for medical bail. No, that's not done.
It's very well thought of. Ma'am, thanks for your time. Just on the concluding remarks, there have been some comments made by many judges that there is a need to have a separate bail law. While that has not been taken into account while BNSS came into picture, do you think that there is a need for a separate bail law or separate bail courts for that matter?
No, I don't think there's a need for a separate bail law at all. I mean, there's too many bail laws according to me. I mean, there's no need for these special conditions also in these special legislations, because I do feel if 100 years ago, a colonial master felt that, even in those days there was economic offenses, even in those days there was sedition laws. But if they felt that unless the offense is punished with death penalty or life sentence, there is really no need to arrest. Or the bail provisions did not require public prosecutor to be heard and no reasonable belief offenses. So why now, as an independent nation with an Article 21, are we putting in all these clauses? I mean, I think our state is robust enough. We are not a banana republic. We have a strong, spine as a nation. So a few, money launderers or a few people accused of milder offenses in UAPA. For the special bail law, 7 years, 10 years offense, 8 years you're in jail, then you get acquitted. And now Supreme Court has done a very good thing by giving huge compensation, because that will pinch. It's coming out of taxpayer money. So, taxpayers will one day start questioning, why did you arrest him? Why didn't you give him bail? So I don't think any new bail law is necessary. Yes, if they can have fast-track bail courts, dispose. I'm not saying give bail, reject. But don't keep it pending.
Okay.
endlessly.
We have seen in many bail matters there have been mini trials
Yeah.
because of the procedure that we have. Do you think that should go?
See, the mini trial becomes necessary because of the provisions under PMLA and UAPA.
Okay.
But in the case of Divangna, Kalita and Narwal, the High Court did that mini trial and found that no, the offence, the prima facie.
Yeah.
Then the Supreme Court said, why have you passed such a long order? The state opposed. Why a mini trial? Whereas judges who try to give summary, then the state says, oh, but you have to meet this special criteria. So yes, there shouldn't be a mini trial unless there is a death penalty or life sentence.
Okay.
There, yes, the statute, these are heinous offenses.
Okay.
You know? So serious offenses are different from heinous offenses. And the punishment determines that, not the nomenclature.
Sure. Okay.
You know, according to me. This is my humble opinion, if I may say so.
No. Thank you so much, ma'am,
Thank
for
you.
your time.
Thank you.
I think for our audience, if I can summarize today's discussion, we've discussed how bail originated, how it operated differently in a colony and an independent country. And ma'am has tried to clarify various misconceptions, if I may say, that a general public may have how bail operates in country. Perhaps there are less aberrations than we think there are. Thank you so much, ma'am. We
Thank you.
hope to continually engage with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.